So hello everybody, this is Dave Parry from Wellmeadow and you're listening to the SME Growth podcast. Now all businesses want to grow, so we're here to discuss some ideas on how to get more leads and how to convert them into customers. So today, joining me on today's episode, I've got Richard Buckle, and
Hello.
We're talking about buyer journeys.
Buyer journeys.
What are they? What's a buyer journey?
What's a buyer journey?
I'm imagining a knapsack on your back, wandering down the streets of London. No, what's a buyer journey? What's it all about?
Well, it's one of those things that it's probably important to set the scene a little bit as to why we think buyer journeys are important. It's something that everybody goes on. We've all been on a buyer journey. Just think of the last purchase you bought. You went through a process by which you came to a decision to buy the thing that you were looking at buying. So we want to just dig into that a little bit. But why is it important? Well, over the last probably 20 years or so, there's been a shift in the way that people have done marketing. Historically, you might be putting an ad out there and just selling to people. But then along came Google. People have got access to a huge amount of information now about your company, your brand, different products, all of that. So there's a lot more considered purchases going on, and buyers have a lot more information at their fingertips. So you've got to be a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more focused on how you take people through that process to finding out about you, through to considering their options, and then looking at making a decision to buy from you. So that's what we want to dig into today.
Okay, so it's turning into, or recognizing that there's a process going on here. It's not quite as random as maybe when you're going through it you think it is. And there's some labels here. We're going to come back and explain these in more detail, but we might as well get it out there early that there's these three clear stages that it's worth thinking about in terms of what a buyer goes through in their thinking when they're going through it. Yeah. So you just mentioned it in terms just then, but that first stage is awareness of something, awareness of a problem or of a need or an opportunity. There's you go from a state of not being aware to being aware.
Yeah.
That's the first bit. Yeah.
Something happens where you think I've got a either an opportunity that I need to look at or a problem that I need to fix.
Yeah, maybe a mate tells you, I've seen this product, or you see someone else using it, or you hear about it, or you suddenly have a pain. It needs some sort of trigger, doesn't it? So there's a trigger which is associated with this first stage. You go from this state of unawareness to awareness. Then you've got the next phase where you're starting to consider different ways of going about it. And that's not the same as considering different competitors to do the same thing. Maybe your problem is, I don't know what to do tonight. So you're looking at everything from restaurants to cinema to bowling alleys to sitting in and getting a carry out. You're considering different ways of doing stuff. Really
it's considering options, isn't it?
Options.
Rather than competitors.
Not alternatives necessarily.
Yeah.
Option, how to solve my problem. Do I even need to solve my problem? Yeah. And then the last one is the decision stage. So we'll come back to all of those bits.
Yeah, dig into those.
And dig into it. So because of the way I think, I've got this matrix in my head where, remember last week we were talking about buyer personas and all these different types, these semi-fictionalized characters that depict the types of person we're trying to talk to. And they're useful to keep in mind because it dictates your tone of voice, your messaging, which key points to hit on. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to last week's podcast to get on that. So I've got that down one side of this sort of mental matrix that I've got. And then on the top, I've got the buyer journey. So if imagine you've got 5 buyer personas, and there's no right number, as we said last week, it could be anything, but let's say we've got 5. We definitely got these 3 stages of the buyer journey. I'm almost imagining this matrix with those boxes all need to have something in them if they're relevant. So you've got different people going through journeys, and it could be lots of overlap. Maybe the same bit of content or style appears in different places. You just, maybe the difference is how you point to it. You use a different channel to tell people about it, or you use different language or whatever. But the point is you've got these boxes to think about, and it's not as linear as we were talking about last week, which is just the 5 or 10 or whatever it is buyer personas you're talking to. They're just going through these stages.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful way of thinking about it. And then you can actually either think about what kind of content you need. But I think before you even get to that stage, for each buyer persona at each stage of the buyer journey, you want to ask the question, what do we need to do to help someone move from this stage to the next stage? So what questions are they asking? What information do we need to provide? And how are we going to give them the confidence that we can be the people that help them on this journey?
Yeah, okay. So it's not just a question of waiting for them to get to their next stage. We're there to hold their hand through that process. Yeah. But we can't drag them through it either. If they're not ready yet to make the decision or to move from awareness to consideration, we can prompt them, but we're still needing some sort of signal back to say, right, I'm now at that next stage, and we change our approach.
It's back to that. I think we probably touched on it on last week's podcast about the hero's journey.
Oh, yeah.
We're back into that kind of territory of how do we, play that kind of Gandalf or that sagely role, as it were, to say we can help advise you through this process. Now, you're not doing that. That may all be done through a website, or there may not actually be a physical advisory piece going on. It could be that you've just got to think about how you design your website, how you design your flow through your website, how you do all those sorts of things. But it's about, I think, before you even get to any kind of let's go and make some content to help, and we'll touch on that a bit later, I think, but it's about coming up with the questions to say, if we get our head into that particular buyer, now that could be, we touched on some of our buyer personas last week as well, but let's say we've got business owner, then maybe that buyer journey might look quite different to someone who's coming on that's running a marketing department.
Oh, for sure, yeah. They're going to have different buttons to push.
And they're going to have different questions. They're going to have different things that they're looking for. And it may well be that the same content serves that, both buyer personas. And there is definitely some overlap, but there is opportunity to think, well, if they're asking different questions, do we need to come up with either different answers for sure, and maybe that's different content. So
yeah, and we came up with an example last week, didn't we, where one of the ways we might be able to help certain buyers is, for example, helping them put a presentation together to persuade their boss to go with a solution. Now, clearly, you wouldn't necessarily have to give that to the boss, would you? So there's a very clear difference. But if you wanted a list of the benefits or an ROI calculator, then that would apply to both of them. So it's not the case, you're right, to say that every box in that matrix or every way of thinking it has to be different, but at least it prompts you to ask that question, doesn't it? What would this person need? Where are they at? How can we help them?
Yeah, I think it's all about contextualizing, isn't it? That's every buyer persona at every different stage of the buyer journey is going to have a slightly different context. And so it's about lining up what content you want with that particular context.
And this isn't scientific, is it? The point is it gets you to think about these things at least a bit, in a bit of a different way than just pumping out. We were saying last week, a lot of companies, if they've even got as far as having a monthly email communication of some sort, a newsletter, whatever they call it, it tends to be the same thing. And it's more than just tailoring it now to the buyer personas, it's tailoring it to where they're at. So why don't we talk a little bit about then how we use this knowledge once we've got people categorized into buyer personas and buyer journeys and maybe the unknown lot, what to use them for. And the first one, which I referred to just there, is that email. That's a classic one where you could even send a different email to different people because your segmentation of your CRM database allows you to do that with all the ways you select the lists. But it could also be, and this is one we did recently as well, to put the different stages of the buyer journey in different bits of the email. So you could almost, apart from the intro bit, you could then have an awareness section which says, would you like to find out more about this area? There's a link to something or some call to action. Then the next bit is more about the consideration. Maybe you already know about it. Say, would you like to know about alternatives and what other people have done? And then the last bit, you're going more into the decision phase. So, would you like to book an appointment to have a chat about it? Would you like to have a demo? Would you like to have a free trial? So they're three very different things. And if they're all in the same email, you can almost tell where somebody's at in their journey by which, if any of those areas, they click on.
Yeah, and I suppose then it's important to think about that in terms of what's happening behind it as well, isn't it? So if someone does click on an awareness, obviously the easiest one there is the decision, isn't it? Someone wants to book a meeting and, most people are going to jump on that and have the meeting and take it from there. But what happens behind that? So if someone clicks on an awareness button or a bit of content, how then is that being, you're back to your questions then of, well, how do we move them to the next stage? So is there another workflow? Is there another set of emails? Is there another... And
there's probably a bit of internal education to go on here, especially if you've got a marketing team separate from your sales team and you're of some size, that if a buyer or potential buyer is in the awareness stage, don't jump on them with decision type discussions. Don't try and ring them up and say, can I force you to a meeting? I'll do that old, alternative close method. It's not about that. You're not there yet. They haven't even really fully accepted that they've got the problem, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that's probably brings up another interesting thing to think about is the timing of this. How long does it take to go through the buyer journey? Now, this is, again, back to context. So for some businesses, it could be 6 months from finding out, okay, we've got a problem with something, and then actually, we've got to go and find some different options of how we're going to solve this problem, and then different technologies, different, different suppliers, whatever. and then coming up with a decision. That could be, if you've got a number of people that have got to be involved in that, you could be looking at a very, very long kind of buyer journey. But also you could have something where you go through that stage of awareness, consideration, decision in 15, 20 minutes. If you're buying something online, you think, well, I've got, find a new, I don't know what, meat thermometer. That's something I was looking at this morning. And the technology there has moved on a lot. It's if you want to get your...
Are you going for a Wi-Fi one?
Maybe.
Everything's got to be Wi-Fi. Presumably AI enabled.
AI enabled, so I can get that beef absolutely perfect, medium rare.
Knows what you want anyway.
But, that sort of thing. I was like, oh, right, okay. I was vaguely aware that existed. Then I saw it, and then, okay, what's my kind of consideration then is, well, I can carry on guessing. I could use the old, one that we got free with a turkey with Christmas 10 years ago or something. And, or maybe look at this and say...
I'd ring my mate Richard, who always does research on these things, and say, which one did you get? I love that. But you raise an interesting point there, that even though a buyer may well always go through those steps, however short or long it may be, you may not know them from the beginning of their journey.
Yeah.
So they may have done their awareness and consideration bit with another website, another product, maybe read a book, read a magazine, whatever, maybe doing it offline in the pub chatting to their mates. They may only come to you at the decision stage. Doesn't mean that they haven't been through the journey.
Yeah.
But you don't want to go back to the awareness stage just because they've just come onto your website. You don't assume that they're still at awareness when you first meet them.
And I think, back to my meat thermometer example.
This is going to be a theme for many podcasts. We're going to ask you how you use it.
I can see that could go wrong.
Burn any barbecues this weekend?
Actually, but I've seen these, digital meat thermometers, wireless things elsewhere. Now, I don't even know if the company that I was looking at this morning was the same company that first enlightened me to this new world of, digital cooking. It wasn't, and it probably wasn't. But that then, are you then educating your competitors' customers? You don't want to be doing that. So it comes back to how do you control the buyer journey then? So how are you, you don't just want to put
have we not got that exact example? For those of us that know us well, know we have a product of our own where we're educating the market in how to run their meetings properly. And we've developed a whole software product around it. If you haven't heard of Magic Minutes, available online now. But we felt a lot of the time that we got a lot of traffic from that site, a lot of people coming into the idea of it, and then they started looking around for alternative products, and they don't always end up on yours. So you're right, the one you end up using as the vehicle to learn about may not be the one you end up buying.
Well, I think on that example, we've even got competitors now that market using Magic Minutes in their AdWords. So we salute you and say thank you for the recognition.
Yeah, exactly. The best form of flattery is imitation.
But it is it is important to think about how are you controlling that journey?
Yeah.
So that when people actually find out about you, have you got content then that enables you to capture an email address or at least find out who that person is, that stranger.
It's analysing who they are or where they're at, isn't it? And this is, we do this on our growth generator grid, just to show that activity has to happen. So rather than just harvesting an email address, which is better than nothing, but what do you do with it? You've got to go through certain steps then to try to work out what does that person need. Yeah. And that includes where are they on their journey as well as who they are. And you're not going to know that just from the first time they come on the site. You've got to, or respond to an email, or click on a social link.
And if it is more transactional, like buying a meat thermometer, I'm probably not going to give my email address away to, I don't know, get an ebook on how to cook meat properly or something. So you've got to move someone through that very, very quickly to get them to that decision point of, am I prepared to click this button to buy this product? So there's a whole load of stuff in there around, well, how do you build trust very quickly on the website? How do you take, that, and essentially that is what you're trying to do through a buyer's journey, is say, trust us, we can help you.
Well, don't forget as well, a lot of the marketing messages that we put out are to people that are known to us. Maybe the HubSpotters grab their cookie details and we know, and we're introducing them to something new or different or something just they haven't used before. And we've got this with some of our clients at the moment with different products and insurance setting, for example. Lots of people buy a number of different insurance products. Yeah. They may already be known to you for one product but not another. So it could well be that just the very knowledge of what have they reacted to, a particular social media post, a particular email, a particular page on the website, immediately allows you to understand that they're at that stage in the buyer journey for that product, even though they were at another stage, maybe already an existing customer, for one of the other products. So we're all going through different buyer journeys, even with the same company at the same time, aren't we? Depending on what you might.
Yeah, that's a good point, that particularly if you've got more than one product offering.
So you've got to be able to think about that differently, maybe. Yeah. What are we doing? Now, we're off on a bit of a tangent there, but I was thinking about where would we use these buyer journey bits of knowledge and buyer personas, and we talked about emails and how we've done that before. Yeah. But there's other ways we can use it as well, and we've just touched on social there, for example. We can do different types of messaging, either through different channels, and we covered that last week about where do our different buyer personas inhabit different channels. That's as true for their buyer journey stuff. You might go to one place when you're trying to find out about a product. Maybe you'd go to YouTube, for example, to do a bit of research on it, or go on Instagram and just be prompted. Whereas when you're definitely in the decision-making phase, you may well be going to people's websites, looking for case studies, testimonials, trials, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So social's a good example. And the other one I was thinking about was the website itself. And we talked a bit last week about the mechanics of personalizing websites and tracking things.
Yeah, I mean, we experimented a little bit with this on our website, just to, could we almost have a page where you take people through that as an example of awareness, consideration, decision on one page. Yeah.
So the further down the page,
down the page you went, and there was more kind of content that would enable you to, push you toward that decision. It was more of it's a bit of a thought experiment, really, just to see how it works. But the principle does kind of remain that when someone is on your website, it may well be that they've done the awareness on social, but they're going to want to validate that when they come to your website. So does your social messaging then line up with what you're...
Are we aligned? Yeah.
And then, so again, it's how are you, if you're making someone aware of a certain thing on a social channel, when they click on a link or something, where does that take them to on the website? So a lot of people will just send them to the homepage, but that might not be the right place for that particular message. So are you using landing pages to guide people through, and have you got a content offer and all of that type of thing? So there's on the one hand, the whole buyer journey thing is common sense. We all do it every single day. Even going to buy a sandwich at lunchtime, you're probably going through these, through these steps. You're going to, there's a new place opened in town. Oh, should I go there? I don't know. How did I find out about it? Consider my options, go make a decision, buy the sandwich. Exactly. We're doing this all the time.
Talking of which, there's a new sandwich shop just opened 4 doors up the road. A friend was telling me last night. So
yes, yeah.
So we've got to go vegan
one
shop.
So
got to go and check that out.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
So, but it's so on the one hand, it's quite simple because we're doing this all the time. We're all aware of it. On the other hand, there is a lot of moving parts on this, particularly when you've got maybe a bit more of a complicated buying process. And
it's not as simple as it seems, is it? It's a really powerful, simple concept, like so many simple concepts are. Just that acknowledgement that not everybody is thinking about what they're doing with you at the same time in the same way.
But it's like using an iPhone or something, isn't it? It's very simple to use, but actually what's happening underneath it all is very, very complex.
Well, and different people are at different stages on their maturity of use of an iPhone. Yeah. Some people use it for phone calls and texts. Other people are writing code on them and doing all sorts. They're all different places.
So is it worth talking about some of the different contents that
I think so. So should we just revise then what the 3 stages are and broadly what's happening in each one?
Yeah.
And then let's have some examples, which real world, what can we do about it? So we've got these 3 stages of awareness, consideration and decision. And when you're thinking of content, then the awareness stage has got to be around doing the research, understanding where you're at and what's on offer, doing all that sort of thing, putting a name on it, defining it. It's a bit like that. Until someone's done the, I'm an alcoholic stand-up thing, they can't address the problem or whatever need you identify as having. So that's the first bit. Consideration, we said before, is about options, but also alternatives to the options. Can I put up with it? How much am I prepared to invest to make this problem go away or achieve this gain or whatever my options might be? Yeah. So we've got to think about what content helps you there. And then at decision stage, you're holding somebody's hand as they're making quite a sometimes brave decision if there's a lot of investment involved. You've got to be aware that they're immediately going to go into some sort of buyer checking stage. You don't want them to have buyer remorse. They're going to be looking to validate their decision. So you don't want to rush people through it. So you've got to give them confidence they're making the right sort of decision. Yeah. So that kind of informs what type. That's going to be different content, isn't it, for each of those three phases? So go on then, let's come up with some examples in the awareness stage to start with. What sort of thing would we be putting out there for people to use for that?
So I suppose things like a report or an ebook are quite good for helping people in that awareness stage, helping to maybe frame the questions a little bit more that they've got. If they've just come up with a kind of, we've got a problem or something, or we're looking to solve a particular challenge or take advantage of an opportunity, that type of thing. How an ebook or something like that can give content.
So that works quite well, bearing in mind that this stage is where you're maybe finding out about people for the first time, if they're starting to search for things. So they may have come to your website through a natural search or even a PPC ad, pay-per-click ad. So they've come in and found something which is related to their search term. So you've got to structure your website then to bring them gently into that ebook place with enough thought that they're prepared to give up their email for the whole content.
Yeah, and I think this is where you've got to look at your content's got to add value. Definitely. And rather than just be, well, here's a sales brochure.
Definitely not wanting a sales brochure.
It's like at that point you're not at a decision stage. I
want something more educational, don't we?
Yeah, we want to say, well, we all want to go into a kind of sales process armed with some knowledge so that we're not ignorant buyers. So what you're trying to do here is say, look, we're going to actually try and educate you in our product or service or just the general area around it, so that you're able to ask more intelligent questions. You've got a better map of the landscape.
You learn the language, maybe.
Acronyms, lingo, whatever it is. It's so that's what you're trying to do at that stage, and by doing that, you're able to start building trust.
Yeah. Some of that, of course, may be off-site as well. We've talked there about what you do on your website and the content that's downloadable from it. But imagine somebody's consuming some other media, maybe in a magazine format or a news format or whatever. Editorials are good for this, or advertorials, where you're starting to plant the seed of an idea that something exists with someone else's voice, and they bring that to you. And it's a bit like the example we just gave just now with the sandwich shop up the road. That could be a referral mechanism as well. Someone suggests to you for the first time, that's the trigger. Suddenly you've got an awareness, there's something there that may give me a gain, take away a pain, help me to do my job, those value proposition things. So it's not all about what's on your website. So be aware that there's lots of different ways someone might be triggered into an awareness stage of the journey. You then just got to serve them up with more that helps them educate themselves and
things like,
the subject.
I mean, how many people now go to YouTube to look for, I've heard about a topic or a new, a new meat thermometer or something, and you're going to go to YouTube to look at it because you want video content to understand it.
If you're already at the I want a meat thermometer stage, you're in consideration. But if it's how do I cook a better meal, cooking, then lots of those search terms will start how to or how do I. And so the YouTube stuff that comes up with those responses is very valuable awareness stage stuff, isn't it? How do you do this?
Yeah.
How do I solve this problem or get better at? Okay, so we've gone through an awareness phase. We're now moving ourselves gingerly into the consideration. I'm realizing that the solution to my problem of undercooked chickens on the barbecue is that I need a meat thermometer or something else that can monitor the temperature of my cooking or stop me poisoning my guests. So then you're starting to consider alternatives. So leads itself to a different type of content.
Yeah, so this may be where you're starting to actually look at comparing options. So that, and there is some crossover here. Maybe it's, so you might be looking at comparison videos or something, or maybe
one of those classic sort of product comparisons.
Product comparison charts.
Ticks in the boxes of who's got which feature.
So those sorts of things.
We could do a podcast on it.
We could do a podcast on
it. You'd love that.
And I suppose there's a podcast on
Meet Thermometer podcast.
Meet Thermometer podcast where we compare different. We'd probably have to.
We'd have to be at
a barbecue, doing all of that. And I suppose there is some kind of crossover there between awareness and consideration with some of this kind of video podcasty type of thing. Things like infographics can be quite useful for just quick summarize one page, something visual.
If it's complicated, you might run a webinar on it and invite people to come along and obviously watch the recording afterwards, where you get to take live questions from an audience. What about this? What about that? Have you thought about that? How do I deal with this? That's all part of the different ways of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I suppose you're always up against the option of doing nothing as well, aren't you? It's like that's one of the considered options is I just carry on with the status quo. So there is an element here where you're trying to actually present some of your solutions in a way that is pushing people towards, well, you've got to do something different. So that's part of the the mix in that, in the terms of the messaging. And I suppose you get onto then, once you've got all your options lined up,
you got to make a decision.
You got to make a decision,
even if it's the do nothing option.
Yeah.
So
that's where you're probably looking to say, well, I'm now aware I need a meat thermometer. I consider my options. Who am I going to buy from? So you're going to be looking at testimonials.
Definitely a bit of social proof.
Who else has used it? Maybe things like a rating, a review of them.
Yeah, the earned media, as they call it. Yeah. Content others put out. Or you could do, depending on the type of product you've got, maybe you do a demo, or you do a free rental for a period. Big capital equipment sometimes uses that. A trial, if it's software, we're all used to having free trials on things. So it's all that grabbing somebody closer to your product, and they you get some kudos from at least helping them to try something else.
Things like return on investment calculators, or any kind of calculator, really, depending on what the product is.
The other one I really like in one of our favourite books, the They Ask You Answer book by Marcus Sheridan, if you've not heard that before. But he came up with this idea in his anecdotes in there of coming up with an awards scheme where he as a company would give awards to his competitors, which is really counterintuitive when you think about it. But he chose the others in his field. He took some soundings from what his either customers or customers that he'd lost, what they thought, gave them awards, and of course then they were proudly displaying their award as granted by his company. But also if you have your own awards, if you've won an award or something, and you don't have to wait for someone to ring up, you could organise an awards thing for your local community and get some feedback, and it all gives a potential buyer at that stage more of a reason to go for you. You could also offer other risk mitigation strategies like warranties and money back and that type of thing as well. There's quite a lot there.
There's quite a lot there.
Big subject.
And and with all of that, it's with each of those you're contextualising the type of content you're producing for the stage of the buyer's journey, and also for your buyer persona. So there's for something simple, there's an awful lot to think about.
There's a lot to it. That's a lot to it. Well, I think we've completed our journey through this podcast. We've got to the end. I love it. For as much as we've got time for today. So you've been listening to the SME Growth podcast. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, and tell all of your business friends. In next week's podcast, we're going to have a slight break from tradition. And instead of Richard and I warbling on, we've got a guest in the name of Roger Martin Fagg, whose economic reports we publish every quarter. And we invited him to Shrewsbury recently and recorded the session. So next week's podcast is the audio of that session. So if you're interested in the current state of the economy and his analysis of it, and I have to say it's more optimistic than pessimistic. So if you want a bit of cheering up, tune in next week to listen to that. Thanks a lot.